When smoke is in the air and flames devour everything in their path, the immediate concern is saving lives, property, and getting the fire out. However, for many, it is what comes after that may be the most devastating. Hi, I'm Derek Dowsett, filling in for Chad Booth. This week on the County Seat, we are going to examine the effects of the Dollar Ridge Fire from 2018. It occurred in one of the driest years on record, and a catastrophic year for fires. The Dollar Ridge Fire came in second as the most expensive fire of 2018, burning 70,000 acres with an estimated cost of $22 million for suppression alone. It also destroyed 87 homes. There are huge costs to our communities that happen as a result of wildfire. Those costs often extend well beyond the initial incident, resulting in impacts to infrastructure, access, and water quality that could stretch on for decades.
The first floods in 2018 actually stopped us from getting up all the way into Wasatch County. The second flood actually made it a little bit worse down into here. We lost a bridge up in here a little ways that was buried. And in 2019, August of 2019, this is what happened out of the bottom of Timber Canyon. And so each time these floods came down through here, the road access and the access for public and first responders got less and less.
Most people think that when the fire's out, then the worry is gone. And if you're a water quality person, you know that that's when the trouble just begins. And that's what's happened on the Dollar Ridge Fire. Within 3 weeks of the fire, the first rainstorm went across and started bringing all of the sediment, started eroding off of the hills and going into the river, and ends up going down this river into Starvation Reservoir.
The fire-scarred landscape, stripped bare of what previously would have slowed the water and held soil in place during a rainstorm, now sheets off the water, carrying with it mud, logs, and debris flows downstream, slamming into bridges and washing out roads, resulting in water flows that would typically only be seen once in a century. Fixing the infrastructure does no good if the river system isn't repaired first. Now, 2 years later, a number of stakeholders are on a tour of the area that has received emergency funds from the NRCS, the Natural Resources Conservation Service, in the form of grants from the Emergency Watershed Protection Fund to reinforce the river channel and protect the roads and bridges that the county is replacing. The EWP program provides 75% of the funding to a sponsoring agency, in this case Duchesne County. The county provides the remaining 25% of the funding, but that amount can be funded in kind. This allows the county to provide the work and materials necessary to hold up their part of the project.
Our intent is to involve that local agency, that local government from the very beginning, and oversight and coordination from the federal standpoint of helping to coordinate the resources to get to the project, and then making sure that there are certain standards that are required that need to be met so that we can obligate federal funds to it. We do an assessment of the damages that have occurred, the threats to life and property and infrastructure, and so on this project we are looking at the presence of sediment and how that was impacting flow in the stream and how its movement downstream was going to impair things like the bridges and the water treatment plant, and potentially affect the way that water flows in the stream, because if you get large sediment deposits in some areas, it can cause the stream to relocate and threaten other pieces of infrastructure like a road or homes or things like that, utilities. There are 2 bridges that have been impacted, and those are the county's responsibility to reconstruct those. It's their job to find engineers and planners and people who can do the actual work, so the contractors and all of that. But the EWP funding can help to build protective measures put protective measures into place like riprap and things like that that'll help to keep those there in the future.
Repairing the waterway has been a long process, not only because of the obstacles created by Mother Nature, but working with a number of entities who have some ownership interest in the river. Private landowners, state and federal agencies such as the Utah Division of Wildlife, Army Corps of Engineers, Bureau of Reclamation, and the Utah Reclamation Mitigation and Conservation Commission all had their concerns going in.
We are a bit unique in terms of federal agencies that own land. We're not like BLM or the Forest Service. The Bureau of Reclamation and us, we're both authorized by Congress to do specific things. And there is an amount of funding identified to carry those projects out. Obviously, a disaster like this is not something that was anticipated. And so we don't have any specific authority or funding to do this restoration work. Consequently, we're looking for opportunities to partner with people like this project. The Bureau of Reclamation and the Utah Division of Wildlife Resources have all pooled our resources together to establish this natural, wild, if you will, corridor for the Strawberry River.
There's a 23,000 acre piece here that we either own part of or manage all of with the Mitigation Commission, and we manage their lands, and so we've been involved right from the very beginning with the county and the whole group trying to help get this work done and done as quickly as we can.
There's just a lot of different entities and a lot of different interests, but I see our job as one to look at all those interests and then apply the engineering part of it to the project and create the design and the improvements that are going to help meet those needs as best as we can with the funding that we have.
We own the land where the river is and even where the road lies, but Duchesne County owns the road. They have an easement for the road, and so we've worked together in this process to try to develop a project that's going to work for all parties involved.
When the damage was fully realized from the two floods that followed the Dollar Ridge fire and then the subsequent flood in August of last year, we knew we had a much bigger problem than we could tackle on our own. And the DSRs had already been, the damage survey reports had already been completed by the NRCS, and those things were identified that needed to be addressed, having to do with infrastructure and with the flow of the river. And without that federal partnership, it's awfully tough to address the things that need to be addressed. We have a couple of full-time residents that live in Timber Canyon, which is on the western end of this Duchesne County project, emergency watershed project, and they've been extremely patient. They've been out of their homes now for almost 2 years, and we were able to get them access for a short time. Unfortunately, August of last year brought another big flood, and huge amounts of water came down Timber Canyon and big debris fields, and it basically locked them out once again. They couldn't get access because of the reshaping of the terrain and the movement of the river channel. And we had some big culverts that got displaced because of that last flood. And like I said, they've been extremely patient. We feel for their position. It would be extremely frustrating to be locked out of your primary residence for that long of a time, but there is a process that we have to follow with the Army Corps of Engineers, and we have to be respectful with our other federal partners, with the NRCS and the Mitigation Commission and other private landowners. There's so many moving pieces to a project like this, and because the ownership of a river like this is so diverse, and we're working with so many different partners, it takes a long time to get buy-in and applications and permits filed and granted. And so we're very appreciative of their patience and hope that we can get moving on this project and get it completed and get them permanently back into their home.
The initial project aims to reestablish access to the canyon. This will involve restoring bridges that were washed out or buried and raising the elevation of the road in the canyon so future flooding doesn't wash out sections of the road as it has in the past. The emergency funding helps to shore up the river system and clean up the mudslides that have come down the canyon to protect the new infrastructure and keep sediment from the river from rushing down to the water treatment plant. When we come back, we will discuss some of the challenges to restoring a river system. Welcome back to the county seat. If you're just joining us, we've been exploring the aftermath of the Dollar Ridge fire from back in 2018 and the Emergency Watershed Protection Project that Duchesne County and a number of partners are preparing to undertake. So, how do you restore a river system?
This is a very narrow canyon. There are places in the past as well as currently where the river comes right up against the roadway. And so in those locations, we've worked with them on plans and designs that will not only protect the road, but they've incorporated some measures that are going to provide better fish habitat. Okay, some rock boulder structures and things like that. The EWP funds, as you've heard, are not specifically to rebuild roads. They're not specifically to rebuild river habitat either. And so one of the things that we're anticipating in the future is to come in and do some river restoration work. We don't have the funding currently to do that. Plus, reason we haven't started that is we feel that there's still a high risk that there are going to be some significant rainstorms producing flood events and debris flows that could affect, a river corridor stretch if we were to do something to it right now.
We didn't want to rush right in. Rushing in was probably not the smart thing to do here. If we had rushed in and done too much more work right after the initial burn, those mudslides came later, and even a year later, that came and wiped out almost everything that was accomplished with the initial cleanup and restoration work that was here.
The thing about the EWP funds is they're a relatively short time frame. They're authorized and approved for a project, and the county then has a very short time frame, a year or so, to carry that out. And so they have to jump at this opportunity and do the work to help protect the road.
And it's our infrastructure. We have a fiduciary responsibility as elected officials in our county to provide the infrastructure and to maintain the infrastructure. And so I think that's the only way it could work, is for us as local elected officials to take ownership in a project and to make sure it's done right.
When we first started working on the design of the project, we obviously were able to highlight and pinpoint the areas that the damage was most prevalent, with areas where you have to drive through the river now to access, and where the road used to be and the bridge is buried with sediment or rock. So we obviously had those areas to focus on. And then we also, besides that critical part of the roadway, looking at how some of these other agencies view this project and some of their needs.
The NRCS has been there to coach us on little hiccups with the project that we've encountered. And I guess that is the silver lining, is we have people that are here to help and people that will help us figure out. We don't have all the answers, but as a team, we've been able to put together a good plan.
The bid to do the restoration work was awarded in the past few weeks, and work will begin soon with the goal of restoring at least some access to the canyon this year. When we come back, we will look at some of the work that has already been done in the canyon to restore some of the vegetation that was lost in the fire and mitigate future erosion and flooding. Welcome back to the county seat. The impacts of fire and the subsequent flooding can often impact an area for decades. As we try to determine the global costs of fire on the landscape, it is important to remember that there isn't a single invoice that we as the taxpayer pay. Restoration of an area is iterative and may require a number of projects to restore a single area. Remember, we are dealing with Mother Nature here, who can often be a fickle master. An entire project could be laid to waste by a single flood tomorrow. Or there may be months where the conditions are just right.
When we had the fire hit and we knew the problems that were going to be here, we were really fortunate though. We were able to get some special funding, emergency funding from the state. And we flew seed on here and got this stabilized and tried to help keep what we could keep solid here as far as erosion goes and reduce that and get good stuff reseeded back in. And then we were fortunate after that to have really good weather after we put the seed on. It snowed just a few weeks after and kind of held the seed right down, and almost just perfect timing for getting the moisture we wanted right after the seed was flown on. It was really close after. So the seed took, we got good germination rates. The overwinter moisture held out really well, and the spring just really watered it down good, and we got great generation out of the seed bank that we'd put out here. And so it really has helped stabilize a lot of the soil out here and reestablish a lot of good positive vegetation for the area here that's beneficial to wildlife, which is what we're of course concerned, but we also are concerned about the fishery here in the river. There's a committee working on this to help restore the habitat and the river channel, the river habitat that'll be here too. We'll be doing that. It'll kind of be a step 2. After we've been recommended we wait at least 3 years, 3 to 5 years before we get too aggressive with doing much, because all it takes is one big storm and it can wash back out what you've accomplished, and that's a lot of money to just throw away. And so our plan is to wait another year at least before we get too serious. It's just a very steep, narrow canyon. The soils here are highly erosive. Even before the fire, this is an area that would get a big blowout rainstorm or two every summer, and it would have a mudslide that would kind of block the road or almost every year. A lot of it's already improved from the fire. A lot of the upland vegetation really benefited from the fire, but some of it was definitely damaged and destroyed by the mudslides, and so that's where we're going to focus most of our work in the future. We're surprised actually at how good a lot of the vegetation is doing. The weather so far has cooperated really well after, and has come back in an amazing way. A lot of it, you can see behind me here how beautiful some of this stuff is, and it's come back with a vengeance. And the ash and soot acts as a fertilizer, and it's been very beneficial in some ways. But there are the problems that are going to take all the money. That's where the real work's going to be, is fixing the problem areas that got hit.
There are still concerns downstream as work begins up the canyon to restore access. The debris that flows downstream is a concern for drinking water in as much as half of Duchesne County. We will see what water managers are doing to keep clean water flowing at the tap when we return.
We recognized very quickly that this was going to be a problem, and looking around the industry, when this problem comes, it's a gift that keeps giving, and it gets worse before it goes away.
Air quality may be the major concern as a fire burns, but there is also a great concern for people downstream, particularly if you are charged with delivering drinking water to a community.
The Dollar Ridge fire hit us a few months later after the fire was done. There was 2 large rain events that created a lot of flooding on the Strawberry River. We had notification a little bit early ahead of it, and so we didn't really see it ourselves coming through the reservoir by the plant, but looking at where the Strawberry Inlet comes into Starvation Reservoir, that mud line and debris line was clear out past the bridge. But the stuff that impacted us was actually underneath the surface.
The cleanliness of water is measured by turbidity units. It's a measurement of how cloudy the water is or how muddy it looks. And normally this stream that's behind me that goes into Starvation Reservoir is typically less than 10 NTUs, less than 10 units of measurement. Right after this fire, it was thousands.
We had to find a very sweet spot in where we take the water and adjust chemicals. And there were certain processes like ozone, we had to actually double the dose to be able to remove those tastes and odors, just to be able to keep the aesthetics of the water top notch, as well as keep the turbidity and other parameters going out the back door.
Perhaps more challenging is the nutrients that are in the sediment, and those nutrients then produce algal growth and algal blooms and taste and odor concerns. We have a treatment plant that provides about between 40 and 50% of the drinking water in Duchesne County. It sits right on the east side of the dam at Starvation Reservoir, and we pump out of the reservoir up to our treatment plant. Our treatment plant is a direct filtration plant, which means we don't have a sedimentation process. Why? Because we use Starvation Reservoir as our sedimentation process, and for more than 30 years it's worked very well to do that. But since this fire, it's not working so well. And so we're in the process of constructing a sedimentation process. It's a new process at the treatment plant. Just the cost to add that process at the treatment plant is about $28 million.
The impact of the Dollar Ridge fire will continue to affect the surrounding area for the long haul. But with the help of the funding received from the Emergency Watershed Protection Fund, Duchesne County will be able to restore some access to the canyon in the near future.
Any officials who have been through the recovery stage after a fire understand how long of a process it takes. We were told up to 10 years. We were under a timetable that we weren't sure what the timetable looked like. With NRCS money coming available, it didn't come available until late September of last year. And we had a very short window to sign for that project so that we could get moving. I think things are looking better as far as stabilization because of the work that's been done. The DNR was able to get some money and do some reseeding, and that helps stabilize things, but we know it's going to be a long process. I mean, we haven't started the project yet, but we have a lot of dirt to move out of these side canyons to protect our infrastructure, a lot of channel cleaning to do, but we're hopeful that once we get all the applications and permits in place that we'll be able to move forward and move quickly and finish by November.
Thank you for tuning in this week. I hope you learned something new about the effects of fire on our communities, especially in areas that impact our watershed. Dollar Ridge was a human-caused fire that might have been avoided, but the abundant fuel load across the state creates huge challenges in terms of how to protect communities from wildfire in the future. That we will address in a future episode. Remember, the government that affects your life the most is the one at the local level. Keep watching and get involved. We will see you next week on the County Seat.
Thank you for watching the County Seat. Be sure to subscribe and turn on your notifications to keep up to date on the program and happenings around Utah.